Okay, we're live. We're back. Hi, everyone. My name is Sunny. Good morning to you all. This is the Sunny Ray Show. Thanks to our sponsors, Raz Rocket, GTN Ventures. Today, I'm joined by John Cornick. John, how you doing?
Excellent, Sunny. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Yeah, likewise. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. John, where in the world are you calling in from?
I'm calling in from Cape Town, South Africa today. It's a nice summer's day
Oh,
down here. Yeah, enjoying the African sun.
cool. So I think maybe before we get started, so one way I like to kick it off is just to maybe share a couple lines on the company you're building, just maybe a little bit about the mission, and then we'll put that on ice and come back to it maybe near the end.
Sure thing. I find the best place to start with Plentify is describing the problem we're trying to solve. And that is ultimately that solar is the cheapest form of generation in history, but it shines at the wrong times. It shines during the middle of the day, and particularly in the residential sector, most people want to use electricity in the mornings and evenings before and after work. This mismatch is possible to solve with things like batteries, but batteries are expensive, and this is where Plentify comes in. So what we do is we control the appliances in your home to shift when they consume electricity to align with those cheap, clean times. And we do it in a way where you notice no difference on service delivery in your home. You still get hot water when you open the tap, you just get a much lower electricity bill and a much lower carbon impact on the world.
That's fascinating. And with a name like Sunny Ray, I'd be lying if I said I haven't thought a lot about solar. So cool. So John, I'm excited to roll our sleeves up and dig into that. But as I always say, it's a bit empty for me, and if I don't get to know the person kind of behind the company, right? So maybe take us back a little bit. Where are you from? South Africa? Were you born there? I was reading that your father was a station master in South Africa. Is that correct?
No, that must be
No.
somebody else's.
Okay, so maybe I messed up. But tell us a little bit about your background. Yeah, what was your worldview before like tech and entrepreneurship and all this crazy stuff?
Yeah. No, absolutely. So, I mean, I grew up in South Africa. I'm from Cape Town originally. I dating myself, but I grew up in the 80s, which was a tumultuous time in South Africa, towards the end of apartheid. And that's really shaped who I am and what I care about. Um, Through my professional career, I studied in Cape Town originally at the University of Cape Town down here. I worked in management consulting, and it was in management consulting that I happened to get placed on a project in the clean energy space. I'd been working on mines and railways and a bunch of other random stuff until then. And on this energy project, I realized for the first time that you could care about the content of what you're working on and not just the intellectual stimulation of the work. And so that was the hook for me to get into environmental sustainability. I quit my job after that project, and I've spent the last 20 odd years focused on the space. It started out working in carbon finance, so helping a Swiss company called South Pole Group establish their African operations and grow that into a sustainable operation. Essentially, we're working with projects which reduce greenhouse gas emissions to get carbon credits. After that, I worked in a variety of consulting roles in the clean energy space. I worked for Google, helping to run their African energy business. And then about 9 years ago, I left Google to start Plentify, which has been the latest story in my life.
Wow, that's cool. So many questions. I guess the first one would be, or just a comment rather. I read this quote. I forget who it was. Maybe it was I forget. I think maybe it's "The world is flat," but he has a quote in there where he says that what is it? When you take the energy from under the ground and you bring it to Earth, you bring, hell on Earth. When you kind of reach to the skies above, you're bringing heaven on Earth, right? I don't know how true that is or not, but I always felt like solar is this abundant source of energy. It is literally where most or all other forms of energy come from. So it just makes a lot of common sense that we would, reach towards the sun to capture some of that. So I guess I'm very curious about your experience at Google. Like, what was it that that you learned by working at one of, or if not the largest company in the world, the one that touches all of our lives, about large scale systems and how to address these like mind-bogglingly like large problems that the world faces.
Yeah, it's a great question. I was extremely lucky to land this gig at Google. I think I happened to be in the right place at the right time. I was finishing up business school, looking for opportunities, and heard that there was a role on Google's green business operations team at the time. Green business operations doesn't necessarily scream energy, so I had no idea what the scope of the role was. And to be honest, I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I didn't even know Google was a profitable company back then. Obviously, I studied up hard and managed to do okay in the interviews and joined this team. And the reason why I say I was in the right place at the right time is I joined this team in their head office in Mountain View, and I came to them with a whole bunch of experience on how to develop the clean energy sectors in Africa and other emerging markets. And it happened to be at exactly the same moment where Google was thinking about how they could play in the renewable energy space internationally. By then, they'd already invested about $1 billion into clean energy projects in the US, and that had gone really well. And so they were thinking about expanding internationally. The reason why they were doing this was twofold. The one was they had about $80 billion of cash at the time and a policy not to pay dividends. And so this was a great segment into which to deploy large amounts of capital and get good risk-adjusted returns. And the second, and particularly for the emerging markets piece, access to energy is an enabler for access to internet. If you can get more people connected to the grid, then that's the precursor to getting them connected to the internet. And that was the strategic link. And so when I joined, they were thinking about expanding internationally, and they charged me with this mission of trying to figure out where we should go and how we should invest. And completely objectively, we landed on South Africa as our first investment destination. We invested in a big solar farm down here, which at the time was the largest solar farm in Africa. And then a few months later, we invested in what was the largest wind farm in Africa, up in Kenya. Further down the path, we ended up pivoting a bit towards energy access. So not just these big projects, but trying to get people access to electricity for the first time through solar home systems and microgrids. I think reflecting on that experience and what made Google successful in this area that was so disconnected from their core business, I think was the beginner's mindset that we brought to these problems. We faced these incredibly risky, complicated energy projects that had been under development for 12 years already in Kenya, for example, when we arrived, and we managed to help them close that in about 6 to 12 months from there. And it was because, despite the fact that others like the World Bank had pulled out of this project, we looked at everything from a first principles basis. We really understood the core of the risk, and we were able to come up with new creative strategies for overcoming these risks, unfettered by the established kind of status quo of how things were done in the industry. So I think that was one big advantage that we brought. Another big advantage that we brought was, I guess, the pressure or the encouragement that the senior execs gave us. So I remember when we took our first African deal to the CFO, the reaction at the time was, "What are you guys doing? We can get these great returns in the US. Now you're telling me to go deploy capital on the other side of the world. The returns in absolute terms don't seem that much higher. Does this really compensate us for all this additional risk?" And so we spent a lot of time kind of building up our own knowledge and educating people internally around what the true risks were and what the appropriate premiums were to take on those risks. And eventually we got everyone internally comfortable, and we executed a few of these projects to the point where we took one of these projects to our CFO, and he was like, "Come on, guys, this is getting boring now. We Google. We're meant to be pushing the envelope. And now we've done this several times before. Go away and come back with something even more transformational than this." And that's actually what led us down the energy access path eventually.
That is that's fascinating. I love that story. So then I guess, what was it like when or what was that process like, or the moment when you decided that, working for Google is the dream job for, I'd say, most engineers and entrepreneurs and or for people like, coming up their career. So what made you say, "Okay, I need to go off on my own and now address, a tangential problem here with your team"?
Yeah, so I think part of it was rational, and that was, I through this work I'd been doing within the African energy space, it was very clear that most activity in energy in Africa was in two areas. It was getting large projects onto the grid, big wind and solar farms, and getting tiny little systems into people's hands to get them energy access for the first time. but very little was being done for the majority of Africa's population that was already connected to a grid system, but suffering the world's most expensive and unreliable power. And I believe that this was a major problem and also a major opportunity to be filled, and that a lot of the technologies and the business models that had been emerging at the time through like pay-as-you-go solar in East Africa and the advances in IoT and AI on the technology side could really help to address this segment. I also believe that it wasn't going to be attractive for Google. It's going to take time to actuate this, and it wasn't going to move the needle for Google at the time. And then finally, I was armed with a healthy dose of delusional optimism, which I think is the key ingredient in any entrepreneur. Not naively and not really anticipating the scope of the challenge, but it's been an amazing ride since I've taken it on.
Hey, John, you mentioned something earlier. If you can maybe double click, you said that you guys took a first principles approach. That's something that, is more popularized now. It's something that I definitely think I like to adhere to. Can you break it down a little bit? Like, what does that mean if someone's hearing that for the first time? And how do you kind of approach problems today at your company?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I mean, it's about when we got presented with a challenge, rather than just trying to solve that challenge directly, it's about understanding what the underlying drivers are of those challenges and getting to the root cause, and then solving essentially the root cause. So, if someone told us, for example, the risk-adjusted return on this project is not high enough, then the first principles reaction to that is to go and understand what all the risks are and come up with an understanding of how much those risks truly cost, and use that to justify either why they're right or why they should rethink their position. And because we were coming in without all of this incumbent knowledge from the space, we were forced in many cases to take a first principles approach. And that ended up being an advantage in many areas.
So you spent most of your career, if I'm not mistaken, at the intersection of energy, tech, and finance in Africa, right? So at what point did you realize that the demand side of the energy equation, not just building more power plants, was where the real breakthrough opportunity was hiding?
Yeah, it wasn't. Didn't come to us on day one. So when I launched Plentify, we had a different product that we took to market. What we were doing is we were helping homes upgrade from electric water heating to solar water heating. We'd pay for that upgrade, and we'd take a share of the electricity savings to recover our investment. And that business was actually going really well. We partnered with insurance companies such that when somebody's water heater burst, we'd phone them. We'd say, "We're sorry, your water heater burst. For no additional cost, we'll upgrade you to solar. You'll save this much money, and these are the terms of the deal." And it was such a compelling proposition that we were converting about 15% of people with a single phone call. And so it was growing nicely. People were paying us every month. It was looking great. We were about to go out to market and start raising money from investors. And around then, something called Day Zero in Cape Town hit. I don't know if you recall this from the news a few years ago. Cape Town came. Oh, you do? Great. Cape Town came dangerously close to running out of water. And one of the ways that they avoided running out of water was encouraging all the residents to cut back their consumption. And so what we found was in the space of about 2-3 months, our users' hot water consumption dropped by 60% as they kind of complied with these conservation pushes. And because we were essentially selling hot water as a service, our revenue fell by 60% as well. And so in that moment, the only thing interesting we had to show investors was, hey, we've got this cool idea that doesn't work in drought environments. We had no evidence that it did work in a non-drought environment because we didn't have enough track record that people were actually going to pay for long enough. And if you think about who we are and what we're trying to tackle, we're a climate tech company trying to hope to mitigate climate change and help people adapt to climate change. We're going to be faced by this problem repeatedly. We're going to be working in these frontier markets. They're going to be exposed to drought. That is going to make this a non-viable business. And so it was around then that we started really going back to first principles again and trying to understand what is a true problem we're trying to solve here. And we realized that the problem isn't necessarily the source of energy you use to heat each appliance. It's the timing of when those appliances use their electricity. Because so much clean energy is available, if you can simply shift the timing of when it's used, you don't have to do anything else fancy around applying a new source to this appliance. You can simply shift your water heater consumption to when solar is available, rather than adding a solar panel to the water heater. And that was the big flip for us, and it's something that's proven itself out in markets around the world. I mean, in the US at the moment, for example, virtual power plants or VPPs are a massive emerging segment where, these demand flexibility platforms are coming out and driving a ton of value and revenue from the electricity systems.
Hey, John, have you touched on Bitcoin at all? I mean, I'm sure you've seen how Texas is using it as like a battery, even though it's not really a battery. But just curious, we don't need to linger on it too long. But yeah, just curious, have you guys tinkered with the idea of using Bitcoin in your systems?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. We have. So I think in a place like Texas, if you have negative electricity prices, or even extremely low electricity prices, then it's very viable to mine Bitcoin. What's quite nice about mining Bitcoin as well is you don't have to have these machines running 24/7. So you can ramp them on and off depending on what the real-time electricity prices are. However, you still need to get a pretty high utilization on these rigs in order to pay back the capital cost. And so, at least from our calculations, we found in a place like South Africa, it doesn't make sense to mine Bitcoin just with excess energy. There are other productive use cases for energy that do make a whole lot more sense and yield much more than Bitcoin. And it's those that we're exploring in more detail. Unfortunately, I can't tell you much more because we'll launch it hopefully in the next.
You'd have to kill me otherwise. No, I'm kidding. Cool. Well, I like that. Well, no, I've been in Bitcoin for almost 13 years. I started India's first Bitcoin exchange. Yeah, so that's why I ask. And so let's maybe, can you talk a little bit about, is it Hotbot and Solarbot? Can you maybe explain it to me like, I don't know, I'm your neighbor or something?
Cool. Yeah. So Hotbot and Solarbot, these are internet connected control devices. Hotbot connects to your electric water heater. Solarbot connects to your residential inverter. Actually, let me make this even more real for you. This is a Hotbot.
Oh, I love it. Okay, nice.
This guy over here is a Solarbot. So they're pretty small little devices. For a Hotbot, basically you cut the power line to your water heater, you splice it in here. It's got a bunch of sensors that plug in around your water heater. And what this guy does is it learns how you like to use hot water in your home. It learns how your water heater stores energy, and it optimizes those two against each other. So basically it heats your water only as much as you need it and only when you need it. So you always get a hot shower when you want it, but you're not wasting electricity by heating water at the times where you don't need it. What Solarbot does is it connects to the inverter in your home. So if you've got a solar system, you'll have an inverter that converts that DC power to AC. And what Solarbot does is it manages, if you've got a battery, the state of charge of that battery, and make sure that you charge your battery as much as possible with solar and as little as possible from the grid. And when your battery is full, some people will sell their power back to the grid. Many people can't even sell their power back to the grid if they've got extra solar, for example. And so what Solarbot will do is it'll talk wirelessly to Hotbot and say, hey, the battery's full, there's excess solar, turn on now. And your water heater will turn on and use all this extra solar instead of it going to waste or being sold back to the grid at a punitive rate. In fact, in Australia, if you sell back power to the grid at the wrong times, you pay the grid to sell power back to them. So there's a huge amount of value to be created here. In terms of kind of what this does, it works in the individual home like I described, but it also networks together to work on a microgrid like an apartment building. So in an apartment building, you'd have a Hotbot on each one of the water heaters in the whole building and a communal solar system that everyone's relying on. And in that situation, all the Hotbots are talking to each other wirelessly, coordinating whose water heater should be heated in real time, given actual solar conditions. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I love that. That's super interesting. Hey, John, I can't believe we've already hit the 20-minute mark. I would love to have you back on, by the way, like for part 2, just on a personal note, because I love this stuff, geeking out on it. And I've only gotten through like, a handful of questions. But John, if you could go back, I'd like to think that the person who's watching is like essentially John as he was about to leave Google, right? Ready to embark on this journey. So if you could speak to yourself that was like, should I be doing this? Should I not? Do you have some advice, or I don't know, some things that you would tell that John, so that he didn't maybe need to hit his head up against the wall so hard for the last
Yeah.
however many years?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I mean, I'm sure you've seen Jensen's quote about, like, if he had it over, he'd never do it again, despite having built the most valuable company in the world. So there's certainly an element of that. Like, I mean, just any entrepreneur will tell you, like, the challenge and the pain that you endure to build something successful is immense. But I probably wouldn't tell myself that. I think part of my power in those early days was the delusional optimism. So I wouldn't want to work the delusion too much. Also, like, in retrospect, I've learned and grown a hell of a lot through this journey. What I probably would say is change the way that you think. I'd say it's probably the biggest thing. So, my first job was in management consulting, and there you take a very much hypothesis-driven approach towards problem solving. You face with a problem, you come up with a hypothesis for solution, and then you gather a whole bunch of data to prove or disprove that hypothesis. Whereas in product, you take a much more iterative approach. You're faced with a problem, you deeply understand the problem, you test a few things, you learn some more, you iterate, you continue to build until you ultimately come up with something that fully solves the problem. And I think I wasted time in the beginning by taking the consultant hypothesis-driven approach, whereas with any product-driven business, you need to take this more iterative product design thinking type approach. So that's probably the thing that has had the greatest impact in the way that I approach my work.
I love that. I love that. That's awesome. Well, I can't believe 25 people are tuned in this early in the morning to watch. I guess it's maybe not so early in the morning for you, but John, thank you. It's a pleasure and honor to have you on. And like I said, I'd love to have you back on in the near future. Anything else you want to share in parting? Maybe, I don't know, you're on LinkedIn. Is that where you post most of your thoughts? Maybe the website for your company might help.
Yeah, that's great. So our website is plentify.io, Plentify.io. And yeah, we of all of our social channels, we're most active on LinkedIn. We're looking to grow our followers on Insta as well, so feel free to hit us up there.
Awesome. All right. Thank you all for tuning in. John, hang back for 1 minute. I'll just bring this stream to an end. Until next time, everyone. Bye-bye.